All right, let's do a vocal video exercise. This is from Rdnbrg's The Need for Words, Chapter 5, and it's the storyline exercise, which I guess I should open my notes for. It's one of these things where I have the text I'm going to use for the storyline exercise is on the Kindle, and the Need for Words is on the Kindle, so I had to do some notes, which is probably good. It probably gets it a little bit more into my mind. So yes, for this exercise, it's going to be you take a certain text, and it's sort of similar to the I don't believe you exercise that I kind of described but didn't do because you need an audience for. This is one that theoretically you can do on your own, where you take text, you describe what happens in each section of action. This is very much kind of framed as you're doing a play or something like that, or kind of it's a dramatic beat stuff. I'm going to use A Distant Mirror, the calamitous 14th century non-fiction work by Barbara Tuchman for the exercise. And actually, I think it might work because Tuchman is such a good writer that just taking a paragraph of her work on the 14th century Europe is a good way of illustrating how there's a driving force from each one of these sentences. So, not sentences, each one of these paragraphs. I've taken this as like each is a little kind of a drama in each paragraph that takes you on a journey through that. And that's what this exercise is going to do. So first, you describe what happens to you in each section of action. You clarify what happens to you physically. And as soon as you've done a speech or scene this way, go straight back and re-speak the text, following the path you've laid out. You'll be amazed how much clearer the storyline has become after doing this diagram of action the words make you perform. Note just how much is happening in the text. So hopefully this is short enough. It's for probably 5 or 6 sentences, and we'll see how that goes and how I can break it down. So here's the text. Let's just read it through, and then I'll try and do it as a diagramming it, I guess, or it's like how I physically feel. So this is talking about Charles of Navarre, who was a rebellious dude in the reign of the king, Jean Le Bon, John the Good, who wasn't fucking good at all. So this is the text. Charles of Navarre, by his outrageous act, became the attraction for a growing group of nobles of northern France who were ready for a movement of protest against the Valois crown. The old condition of stress between barony and monarchy had been freshened by Philip's and Jean's violent reprisal against nobles whom they suspected of treachery. Philip and Jean are the two old kings. Violent reprisal against nobles who they suspected of treachery, and by the military humiliations since Crécy. Landowners, hurt by the flight of labor and reduced revenue from their estates, tended to blame many of their troubles on the crown. They resented the financial pressures of the king and his despised ministers, and pressed for reform, more local autonomy. From his base in Normandy, Charles could become the focus of an adversary group, and he proclaimed that intention like a cock crowing. So, okay, let's kind of go through and think about that. There's definitely a lot of like action words in this nonfiction text. You can tell this is Barbara Tuchman is a popular writer, someone who's like really activating her language, making you engaged. So, Charles of Navarre, by his outrageous act, became the attraction for a growing group of nobles of northern France who are ready for a movement of protest against the Valois crown. Valois? I think it's Valois crown. So, outrageous. You get this kind of outrageous act became the attraction for a growing group of nobles of northern France who are ready for a movement of protest against the Valois crown. So you get this outrageous, you've got the growing, and you've got the kind of pressing against, that kind of physicality in the language. The old conditions of stress, kind of tightening between the barony and the monarchy, had been freshened kind of vibrating, freshened by Philip and Jean's violent reprisals against nobles who they suspected of treachery, and by the military humiliations. Humiliations, kind of gets you right there in the balls there. Humiliations since Crecy. Landowners hurt by the flight of labor, hurt, and then flight of labor, and reduced revenue of their states tended to blame many of their troubles on the crown. They resented resented the financial pressures of the king and his despised ministers, and pressed for reform and more local autonomy. From his base in Normandy, Charles could become the focus. Again, we're getting a focus of the adversary group as he proclaimed that intention like a cock crowing. It's interesting. We've got this kind of inwards and outwards and inwards and outwards, and it's like, focus and then crowing. It's kind of expanding out again. At the very beginning, the outrageous attraction, so that there's this kind of steady kind of rocking and tensions and releases that are happening throughout this single paragraph of this quite long book. Now that you've walk while speaking the text. So allow the different rhythms, phrasing units, changes of thought, and emotional moods, swings to shift the direction, speed, and quality of your walking. You'll discover many corners, bends, and U-turns in the journey of the text, making an intellectual, emotional, and physical journey of the words, actual and real. So I am standing in a tiny little office, but I will do my best, because I'm not gonna walk out there and bother Jean, who's trying to do her own stuff. But let's go. Charles of Navarre, by his outrageous act, became the attraction for a growing group of nobles of the northern France who were ready for movement and protest against the Valois crown. The conditions of stress between the barony and the monarchy had been freshened by Philip and Jean's violent reprisals against nobles whom they suspected of treachery, and by the military humiliations since Crecy. Landowners, hurt by the flight of labor and reduced revenues from their estates, tended to blame many of their troubles on the crown. They resented the financial pressures of the king and his despised ministers, and pressed for reform and more local autonomy. From his base in Normandy, Charles could become the focus of an adversary group, and he proclaimed that intention like a cock crowing. Big penis, speaking his mind. He definitely is probably a big penis speaking his mind. So kind of there is, and it's interesting. I can feel like there's kind of like at the beginning there's kind of and at the end there's like but there's that kind of there's that thing of landowners hurt by the flight of labor and reduced revenue from their estates tended to blame many of their troubles on the crown. They resented the financial pressures of the king and his despised ministers, and pressed for reform and local autonomy. That is you can definitely see the variations in there. We've got the kind of the excitement kind of pressures in there, and we've got the kind of the pressures and releases here, and then in the middle there's a bit more of a kind of like here is the calm part of the speech, where we're getting a lot of information in and things are happening and bubbling, but it's not going up and down as much. It's the variations. I think that's the big thing that that Ptsy Rdnbrg was talking about. It's like how a text will take you on a journey, and a good text will have variations in the thing to kind of keep you awake. If everything is like and down and up and down and up and down, after a certain bit, that's just a lullaby and it'll rock you to sleep. But if it's up and down and then soft, and then up and then down at the end, it's like, it woke you up again. It keeps you awake. That kind of that variation there. So remember that your listeners ultimately must be taken on an imaginative journey as well. So let's just talk. Let's just read this out, not do kind of artificial up and downs, but just try and, with that kind of incorporated into my body, let me just read that again. So, Charles of Navarre, by his outrageous act, became the attraction for a growing group of nobles of northern France who were ready for a movement of protest against the Valois crown. The old conditions of stress between the barony had been freshened by Philip's and Jean's violent reprisals against nobles whom they suspected of treachery, and by the military humiliations since Crécy. Landowners, hurt by the flight of labor and reduced revenue from their estates, tended to blame many of their troubles on the crown. They resented the financial pressures of the king and his despised ministers, and pressed for reform and more local autonomy. From his base in Normandy, Charles could become the focus of an adversary group, and he proclaimed that intention like a cock crowing. A little bit like a cock crowing, and be a bit more sarcastic versus glorious cocks crowing. So yeah, it's another way of trying to really be mindful of the words you are speaking, and that you're trying to convey something there, and a part of what you're trying to convey is a story. It's also maybe not a bad thing for any writing I've done. It's like, okay, this speech, this writing, if I read it out loud, it's like, wow, this is really monotonous. I need to break up the patterns here. And whether that is, oh, everything's too exciting, or everything is just kind of a very much like one sentence lines and stuff like that. It's like, be aware that what the goal of your writing to do when you're creating something or when you're reading something, just somebody else's words, is you're supposed to try and take the listener through a journey and take them on ups and downs and twists and turns, and make it like a really interesting place to go. That is all the stuff that you're trying to do in a text. So yeah, that is the storyline exercise by Ptsy Rdnbrg, and more videos later, including on Saturday to do tomorrow to do a no ums video reporting in on my last couple of weeks of vocal exercises, because I haven't been doing them. God damn it. I should probably review what I've actually done, what I published just recently, which was my 2023 tiny master reading plan, and just sort of report in on, like, rewatch it now that I've published it, and it's, I guess, slightly distanced because I've sent it out in the world and that's it, it's done. Is go back and listen to it and say, all right, from a vocal standpoint, where am I at in my speech? Am I all monotone when I'm just thinking and talking out loud? Or am I actually incorporating some of these lessons? Is it all still just on the surface, or is some of it sort of slowly sinking down into how I communicate on camera? I'll find out. All right, more videos later.